Again, welcome back to Eclipse and Java for Total Beginners. This lesson is going to be fun. We're going to begin work on our checkout and check-in methods. These methods will be just a little more complicated than what we've done to this point. Now what we're going to do is write one test method to test both the checkout and check-in methods. That way we can check out a couple of books and then check them back in, testing after each step. Now before we start, let's review what we want these methods to do. When we check out a book, we want the person who we're checking it out to entered into the person field of the book, because that's what indicates that a book is checked out to that person. So we would use the setPerson method of the book class to do this. Now, what if the book is already checked out to someone else? Should we still check it out to the new person? For this example, we're going to decide not to do this. So if a book is already checked out to someone, we won't check it out to someone else. So we'll need to test for this in the checkout method. Okay, so we've decided that the checkout will fail if the book is already checked out. Since it might fail, should we let the method that is calling the checkout method know whether or not the checkout succeeded? And again, we'll decide yes, we need to do this. So let's write down the steps we need the checkout method to do. The first step is to test that this book is not already checked out. If it is not checked out, we'll use the setPerson method of the book to assign this person to the book and let the calling method know that we succeeded. If it is already checked out, then we'll just let the calling method know that it didn't work. Now, one common technique for indicating success or failure in a method is to have the method return a Boolean value. And if you recall, a Boolean value is something that evaluates to either true or false. So true would mean that the method worked, false would mean it didn't. So we'll have our checkout method return a Boolean type of either true or false. Now, we'll also need to know the book and person involved, since we'll be assigning the person to the book. To do this, we need to have book and person as parameters to the method. So now we know the whole method's signature. It's going to return a Boolean, and it's going to take book and person as parameters. With this in mind, we're ready to start our test method. So we'll open up our MyLibrary test class for editing. We'll go down to the bottom and we'll start entering the new method. So this is a public method. It's void and it's called test checkout. And first we're going to create our objects using the setup method we have. Then we've got to add the objects to the list. So we're going to add book B1 to the book list. We're going to add book B2 to the book list. And then we're going to do the same thing for add person P1 and add person P2. And if I look here, I've got all these red lines, and if I look why, I left off a semicolon. So next, we'll enter in our first assert statement, and this is a little different. We'll talk about it in a minute. It's an assert true, but we're going to put a message, book did not check out correctly, which is a string as the first argument. And then in the second argument, we're going to do our checkout method, ml checkout B1 P1. So we're checking out book B1 to person P1. Make a little space. So let's look at this. First, we have a string as the first argument of the assert true. This is just a way to put in a message so that if this test fails, we'll be able to see why. So in this case, we're saying book did not check out correctly. So it just gives us a little help in case the test fails. Now secondly, we're putting the ML checkout method inside the assert true. Remember that we decided that the ML checkout method would return a Boolean of true or false. So by putting it inside the assert true, we're doing two things at the same time. First, we're executing the method, but then second, we're also testing that the method executed correctly and returned a true value. So if we'd wanted to, we could have just executed the checkout method out here and thrown away the return value. But in this case, we were interested in knowing whether the method succeeded or failed. Next, we'll check that the book is actually checked out to person P1 at this point. So we'll type an assert equals, and we're going to expect Fred, and then we're going to get the get person, get name from book B1. So up here we checked out book B1 to Fred. Remember, Fred was the name of the person P1. And then here we're just saying that when we get the person from the B1 book and then get the name of that person, it'll be Fred. Now, why are we using the name to compare instead of just comparing the objects? Well, if you remember, comparing two objects for equality in Java can be a little tricky. So we're just assuming that everyone on our list will have a unique name, and then that way we can use the names to compare. At this point, book B1 is already checked out. So if we try to check it out again, it should fail. So we'll test this as follows. We'll assert false. Book was already checked out. And then we'll try to check it out a second time. So the assert false will succeed if the resulting value is false, and we're expecting this to be false because we shouldn't be able to check out book B1 twice. So at this point, we've done a very basic test of the checkout method. Now let's try checking in the book as follows. So we're going to type assert true, and we're going to put in a message, book check in failed, and then we're going to check in book B1. Notice that for the check-in method, we are only using one parameter, book. Why don't we need person as a parameter like we did with the checkout method? The answer is that when we're checking in a book, we don't need to know who it was checked out to. And if we did, we could get the person from the person field of the book. So we don't need person in the parameter list for the check-in method. Now we'll try to check in a book that wasn't checked out and make sure it fails. So we're going to do two assert statements. Assert false. We're going to say book was already checked in. Then we're going to try to check in book B1 again. So we're saying this should fail. And then we're saying a second assert false, which is a little different but similar. We're saying book was never checked out. And then we'll try to check in book B2. And again, it should fail because it was not checked out. So at this point, we're ready to start writing the two methods in the MyLibrary class. First, let's use Quick Fix to create the empty methods. So we'll click on Checkout, Control 1, create the method, which it did. Then back, do the same thing for Check-in, Control 1, create the method, and again it did. Now let's look at the test again and see what we need to do. Looking at the assert equals, we obviously need to use the set person method to set the person field in B1 to P1. However, we only want to do this if the person field is empty when we start. So we need to check whether the person field is empty. If it is empty, we need to use the set person method and return a value of true. Otherwise, we just need to return a value of false. Now let's go to the MyLibrary class and start the method. So we'll take out the auto-generated portion and start typing. The first thing is an if statement, and we'll talk about this in a minute. We're going to say if the get person is null, is equal to null, then we're going to set person to P1. And then we're going to return true. Otherwise, which is else, we're going to return false. There are three new things in this method. First, we have an if statement, and the syntax is if, then whatever's in the parentheses is true, then we do this first block of statements inside the first curly braces. So if this evaluates to true, do this section of code. And if the part in parentheses evaluates to false, then we do this section of code between these two curly braces. Now the second new thing is this equals operator. It's very important to notice that this is two equal signs in a row. So it's different than the normal equals operator we've seen before, which is set one thing equal to another. This tests if one thing is equal to another. So it's a Boolean operator, and it returns true or false based on whether the left side and the right side are equal. Now the third new thing in this statement is this reserved word null. Null means that nothing is in the field or variable. So before we've put a person object in the person field of the book, its value is null. So by saying get person equals null, we're saying there's no reference to a person object in the person field of the book. So the way we read this whole expression is if there's nothing in the person field, then set the person of B1 to P1 and return true. Otherwise, return false. Now the check-in method is very similar. Again, we're going to have an if statement. If B1 get person, and then we're going to do not equal, which is exclamation point equal, null. If it's not equal null, we're going to do B1 set person to null. And then we're going to return true, else we're going to return false. So we're saying that if the person in book 1 is not null, meaning that there's a person object in there, then set it to null and return true. Otherwise, this book is not already checked out, so we can't check it in, so we return false. So now we have our checkout and check-in methods written, and we're ready to test them. And we'll do that in the next lesson. This is the end of Lesson 12. I'm Mark Dexter saying so long for now.